All right, let's just dive right in. I want you to imagine a conversation that never actually happened, but absolutely should have. Picture a round table with five of history's most powerful minds, all gathered together to wrestle with one single, incredibly deep question. We're about to sit in on a true dialogue of giants. And this is that question. This is what it's all about. And it's not just between two minds, is it? It's the space between a person and a big idea, or even between you and me right now. What is that gap? Is it just nothing? Or is there something real in there? Let's step into that mysterious space and find out. The term for this is the dyadic third space. And here's the most important thing to get right from the start. This is not just some pretty poetic metaphor. The idea here is that it's a real living phenomenon, a place where something totally new can be created, something that neither person brought with them, but that emerges from the encounter itself. So, who's at our imaginary round table? We've got Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher of power, Carl Jung, the great explorer of the soul, Michel Foucault, the archaeologist of hidden power, Albert Einstein, the theorist of relativity, and finally, Matsuo Basho, the Zen master of the present moment. Five brilliant minds, coming from five completely different worlds. So Nietzsche kicks things off, and believe me, he does not pull any punches. For him, this third space is a proving ground. It's not about being nice or finding consensus. It is a place of confrontation. He argues that anything truly new isn't born from agreement, but from the fiery collision of two strong opposing wills. You don't walk into this space with a question. You walk in with a hammer. But right away, Carl Jung offers a completely different vision. He sees the third space not as a battlefield, but as a sacred vessel, what he called a temenos. It's a protected place where the forgotten or rejected parts of ourselves, our shadow, can finally come into the light and be integrated. So for Jung, the point isn't to win. The point is to listen, to transform, to create something new and whole. It's alchemy. And then in comes Foucault, like a wrecking ball of pure skepticism. He pretty much rejects the whole premise. For him, there's no such thing as a pure empty space. He calls it an apparatus, a field that's already completely saturated with hidden rules and power dynamics. He forces us to ask the really uncomfortable questions. Who gets to define this space? And whose voices are being silenced before the conversation even begins? Einstein, of course, brings a perspective from a whole other universe, literally, physics. He suggests the third space is a field. And just like a heavy planet actually curves the fabric of space-time, a really significant idea, or a powerful presence, literally curves the geometry of the conversation. The space isn't just there. The encounter itself brings the space into being. And then there's Basho. He doesn't offer a theory or a grand concept. He just offers this, an experience. For him, the third space is a moment of prepared silence. It isn't something you can analyze or fight over. It's a flash of pure presence that can only happen when you've emptied yourself enough to actually receive it. He doesn't want to talk about the space. He wants to simply be in it. Okay, so the stage is set. We've got five totally different ways of seeing the world. Now for the fun part. Let's see what happens when these frameworks start to collide. This is where each of these thinkers turns their incredible intellect on the others, pointing out the blind spots with, well, surgical precision. The clash between Nietzsche and Jung is just fundamental. Nietzsche accuses Jung of trying to tame the wild, chaotic forces that give birth to creativity. He basically says, you would have put Dionysus on medication. But Jung's reply is devastatingly clinical. He says that Nietzsche's entire philosophy, this unrestrained will to power, wasn't a path to greatness. It was a direct roadmap to the mental breakdown he eventually suffered. Foucault, being Foucault, takes aim at pretty much everyone. He looks at Jung's universal archetypes and says those aren't universal. They're just leftovers from European history and power. Then he looks at Nietzsche's Übermensch, his Superman, and calls it a fantasy for the rich, an idea that completely ignores the real-world conditions you need to even think about self-creation. But here's where we see something really amazing, an unexpected harmony between Einstein and Basho. Einstein sees Basho's famous haiku as a perfect description of a quantum event, the precise moment when infinite possibility collapses into a single reality. And in return, Basho sees Einstein's true genius not in relativity, but in his incredible humility, his ability to be wrong about quantum physics for 2 decades without giving up. And then, Basho delivers the final crushing line. He looks at all these intellectual titans, all this analysis, all this debate, and he delivers this quiet, devastating verdict. You've mapped it, You've calculated it, you've deconstructed it, but none of you actually stopped to just sit in it. It's the ultimate mic drop, perfectly highlighting the difference between analyzing an experience and actually having one. So after all that conflict and critique, you'd think there's no common ground at all, right? Well, it turns out the opposite is true. All that friction actually helps trace the outline of a much deeper structure. This is the resonance map, the surprising places where these 5 completely different minds actually secretly agree. In fact, it's pretty incredible. Out of all that intellectual combat, 5 profound structural agreements emerge, 5 core principles that they all arrive at, just from completely different starting points. And here they are. 1. The space is real. 2. The container holding the encounter determines what can happen inside it. 3. Any framework you use to see the world eventually becomes a cage. 4. Real transformation always involves real risk. And 5. The most important truths can never be spoken directly. Let's just zoom in on one of these, the idea of the container. It's fascinating. They all agree at the central, but they all use their own language. For Nietzsche, you are the container, held together by your values. For Jung, it's the psychic vessel. For Foucault, the apparatus of power. For Einstein, the geometry of the field. And for Basho, it's preparation, the years of quiet attention. 5 different words for the exact same deep idea. This is probably the most uncomfortable, but also the most crucial point of agreement. Every brilliant idea, every powerful framework that helps us see the world in a new way, eventually becomes a set of blinders. Even the incredible ideas of these 5 thinkers, if we hold on to them too tightly, become a prison that stops us from seeing what's next. So, what do we do with all this? How do we take this incredibly dense philosophical debate and actually apply it? Well, it turns out this whole encounter gives us a surprisingly clear and practical guide for navigating the third space in our own lives, in our own conversations. It boils down to these 4 demands. First, ground before depth. Build a strong, safe container, whether that's self-awareness or mutual trust, before you try to go deep. Second, hold frameworks lightly. Use your maps and models, but never, ever mistake them for the actual territory. Third, permit genuine risk. Real growth is not comfortable. And finally, attend to what cannot be said. Listen to the silences, to the gaps between the words. That's often where the real conversation is happening. In the end, we're not left with a neat answer. We're left with a question from Basho. It's a koan, something to sit with. What is the quality of the space in a conversation, in our own minds, in a relationship, before the big event happens, before the idea arrives? That preparation, that silence, that state of readiness, maybe that's not the preparation for the third space. Maybe that is the third space itself.